All right, let's jump on into Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 63, and we'll go through a few sections here. Hopefully, at this point, you've had a chance to read the passage and kind of reflect on it a little bit, and maybe read it a couple times. Luke 22, 63 through chapter 23, verse 12. All right? So, kind of where we are in the story, Jesus has just been arrested by night. He's been betrayed by Judas in that. He just was denied by Peter, and he's now being held by the temple police. And that's where we pick up in verse 63. So you see, after Jesus is being mocked to prophesy and those sort of things, Jesus standing before the council. That's the Sanhedrin, the kind of elite religious leaders of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. And there's several titles thrown around here I just want to give some definition to. We see Christ, that's the Hebrew word Messiah. We see Son of Man, and we see the term Son of God. And they're all, they're questioning Jesus as to who he is. Is he those things? Christ, Messiah, that just means anointed one. It is maybe most like a human ruler or king that's kind of been appointed or anointed by God. Okay? For the Jewish people, that Messiah would be a descendant of David who would deliver Israel from foreign oppression, specifically Rome, and they would restore the glory of the ancient kingdom of Israel. There was a lot of political overtones to that word Messiah. It's a human that's going to rule and lead God's people back to a supreme place in society. Another term that's used there is Son of Man. You hear Jesus often refer to himself as the Son of Man. The most simple understanding of that maybe is just human, right? The son of a man. They're born of mankind. But really, when an early first century Jewish person would hear that term, they would think of the prophet Daniel. I'm going to read from Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, where this was prophesied, or a vision seen by Daniel. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, God, and was presented before him. And to him, this son of man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So, Son of Man, mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, was just this prophesied, exalted, human-like, but heavenly figure that was oftentimes associated with the final judgment of God and the establishment of God's kingdom. So it's this mysterious Old Testament figure, somehow like a son of man, a human, but also he comes from heaven. So kind of a mysterious figure there that they were expecting sometime in the future. Third term, Son of God. Are you the Son of God? They asked Jesus. Son of God could just simply mean somebody who is has a special relationship to God. Israel, as the nation, is called the Son of God at one point. But in this case, it seems like they're just asking Jesus, are you actually claiming to be divine? Are you actually related to God? Are you actually his son? Are you divine yourself? So you see those three terms, and they're kind of, they all have a little bit different place of grandness. The Messiah was expected to be more of a human ruler on the one end of the spectrum. You've got the Son of God, which would be quite the claim, that's divine. And then in between somewhere you have the Son of Man figure that was a heavenly but human-like ruler that was a little bit kind of mysterious. So three terms that they're throwing, or that is in this conversation with the Sanhedrin. They ask Jesus a couple of questions. Are you the Christ? They say in verse 67, and are you the Son of God? They say in verse 70. To both of those, Jesus doesn't give a crystal clear answer, right? Are you the Christ? He says, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. Well, what's Jesus saying there? I think what he's doing is he's going to their heart. He's saying, you all, religious leaders, aren't going to make this decision on who I am based on what's actually true, but what is advantageous to you. Like either it's going to keep you out of trouble or it's going to get me in trouble, so it's going to keep you out of trouble, or it's not. You just want to have something that doesn't threaten your authority. So regardless of what the actual truth is, you want to hear certain things. It's very similar to a couple chapters earlier, chapter 20, where Jesus was asked, by what authority are you doing these things? To which he just kind of showed them, hey, he asked them this random question about John the Baptist. He's like proving, hey, you guys, you already have your minds made up, and you're not going to like whatever answer I give to you. And even if I give you the right answer, you're going to take it wrong. So I'm not even going to give you a direct answer like you're hoping for, just to incriminate myself, right? So it kind of points out that this trial that Jesus is in is not going to be fair overall, right? There were actually a lot of things that made the trial, you could call illegal maybe, developed later in Jewish literature was kind of like rules for a trial like this. First of all, it should have been done at the temple, which they're here at the high priest house. Secondly, Jesus didn't technically blaspheme, we'll see in this, because he didn't use the actual name of God, Yahweh, which he would have had to have done, I think, technically to be a blasphemer. They give an immediate kind of verdict right away, which Jewish law eventually kind of says that you should have 2 days required before you can make kind of a capital crime determination. He was being tried on a feast day. That would have been prohibited. If there is conflicting testimonies, you'd be cleared of the crime, and obviously Jesus had some conflicting testimonies and wasn't cleared. So lots of things going on here that aren't above the board, but it's just Jesus in this trial, the leaders trying to hear whatever they want to hear. The other question they ask, are you the Son of God, in verse 70? And Jesus answers them, you say that I am. That's a Semitic affirmation. It's yes, but one commentator said that's your way of putting it, Jesus is saying, or that's the conclusion that you're coming up with. But I think what's happening is Jesus, yes, I'm the Son of God, but that may not mean what you think it means, right? All their understanding of who Jesus is, it's not quite right. So even if I answer the question, I'm not actually giving you exactly what you're asking. So he kind of answers in that little bit of a vague way. So the Sanhedrin, this council, they want some clear answers because they're trying to get Jesus to say things that get him in trouble. If he claims to be Christ or a political king, this Messiah, then the Sanhedrin knows Rome's going to have a problem with that. And if Rome finds out, or Pilate, then they could kill him for treason if he's claiming to be a king, right? And if you remember, when they get before Pilate, they're like, hey, he's saying that he's the Christ, a king, right? Be worried about that, Pilate. So they try to get him in trouble that way. And the second, if he claims to be the Son of God very directly, if he claims to be divine, then the Sanhedrin's going to have a major problem with that. And they could, by their own law, kill him for blasphemy because he's insulting God's authority, putting himself on equal ground with God. So they want Jesus dead, but in Jesus' day, the Sanhedrin wasn't allowed to execute people, so they had to kind of put a political spin on things to get the Romans to sign off on Jesus dying. So they thought he was a blasphemer, but they tried to get him on the king charge in front of Pilate just so they could come up with something that Pilate would put him to death by. As Jesus often does, he doesn't answer their exact questions, but he does here in verse 68 or 69 identify himself with this Son of Man figure, which again is kind of that middle ground. It's a mysterious figure from Daniel 7 who's kind of a human ruler, but kind of God, comes from God, rules with God's authority. So he's claiming true humanity and divine authority. So he's Christ, a political leader, and the Son of God. And that's a type of person that they don't even have a category for, except Son of Man, this kind of hard to understand prophecy of the prophet Daniel. And then we see in 69, from now on, the Son of Man, Jesus says, shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. Interesting way to say things. Why does he say the power of God instead of just at the right hand of God like we see in other places? That's a figure of speech we call circumlocution, where you use more words than you need to describe something that could be described in less words. But it's a way of respecting someone by referring to them kind of indirectly. You might do that often with a deity. So instead of saying God himself and kind of talking so directly about him, you respect him by saying the power of God. All right? And it removes Jesus even a little bit more from a direct blasphemy charge, I would say, as well. What does it mean that the Son of Man is going to be seated at the right hand of the power of God? That just means that he's going to share rule and share divine authority, right? So he's still keeping a little distinction. You see some kind of Trinitary stuff going on there. Jesus isn't saying I'm God, Yahweh himself, but he's the Son of God, but he's going to be kind of in that same position, seated with him. But there's a divine rule and authority that Jesus is saying the Son of Man will have, and he's obviously referring to himself. From now on, he's saying, a human shall be working alongside the authority of God Almighty. All right? It's really ironic, I think, that the Sanhedrin were hoping that Jesus would say something to give them authority to judge him, but what he responded with was a declaration of his own authority to judge all people, right? So they're getting a little more than they bargained for. They're trying to incriminate with him with his words, and he turns it around and say, no, I've got you. You're actually under my judgment. And so he's not threatened by them. He can do whatever he wants because he's a co-regent with God. And so it's just more than they even anticipated. It's understandable that they're like, we got to put this guy to death. We're going to lose our power and our position if what he's saying is true. Then Jesus goes before Pilate. You see some of the ways that they're trying to get Jesus condemned. They're saying he's misleading our nation. He's stirring things up. He's telling us not to pay taxes to Caesar, which is blatantly false. He actually said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, if you remember from chapter 20. They tell Pilate he's saying that he's the Messiah. He's a king. Doesn't that worry you, Pilate? And he stirs up the people. So they're wanting Pilate to condemn him on sedition or on treason or something along those lines. And again, Pilate asks him a question, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus kind of gives this arm distance answer by saying, you have said so. So it's kind of a non-committal way of saying, yes, you're right, but not in the way that you're asking. That's how Jesus is answering these questions in part, it seems, because if he says the answer that they're looking for, even if he's answering correctly and accurately, they don't have an accurate understanding of what the Messiah is and what the Son of God is. And Pilate doesn't have an understanding of what God's kingdom is like and Jesus being a king. So he doesn't want to just give him a real direct answer in those things. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is explaining, kind of answering more or less, yes, I am a king, but my kingdom isn't of this world. It's not like you have to be worried about it in the way that you're worried about it. So you can see why he's giving these kind of seemingly uncertain, but still truthful and still positive answers. Yes, you're correct in what you're saying. It's just not quite exactly right what you're thinking. Pilate seems unimpressed with those charges. And then Jesus goes before Herod. I had to spend just a little bit of time looking up who is in whose jurisdiction, where do they cross over. And Herod Antipas, who was one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the one that tried to kill Jesus as a boy. This is his son. He was a tetrarch, or kind of like a fourth of a king, over Galilee and Perea, and he was more like a kind of a puppet role, they say. It was under Roman control, Galilee and Perea, but not a particularly important area, so Rome kind of let them do their thing and let them keep their own peace, and it was fine. He was fine with Herod kind of leading that area. Herod was half Jew and half Gentile, and he kind of just let them do their thing as long as there wasn't... Pilate and the Caesar would let that area do their thing because they weren't particularly important, okay? So Herod has this limited amount of rule that's kind of signed off by Rome. And then Pilate, though, was the governor or prefect, or later called procurator, of Judea and Samaria, where Jerusalem is in Judea, okay? Pilate reported directly to Rome. He was kind of like a military leader / governor, and because those areas, Judea and Samaria, were more volatile places, Rome would want a stronger military presence there if things would ever get out of control. Okay, so different types of authority that Herod and Pilate had. Pilate actually had more authority than Herod. In fact, Herod likely would have to report some things to Pilate. But different kinds of authority and different areas as well, just based on whatever Rome saw fit, the type of leadership was needed for certain different areas. Why were they at enmity at some point? We see in verse 12, they became friends, but before they were enemies. We don't really know. Probably Pilate looks down on Herod, and Herod hates that he doesn't have quite the rule that he wants to have. So there was a lot of kind of conflict between those things. And then why did they become friends after that? Well, we don't really know exactly, but maybe it's because they're both kind of enjoying their mutual kind of mocking of Jesus. He could be a threat to both of their rules, but he's like, they're like, oh, we're just happy that he doesn't seem to be a threat actually. Or maybe Herod was kind of flattered that Pilate acknowledged his authority in Galilee. He's like, hey, this guy's from Galilee, you can take care of him. That might have felt good to Herod, and so they might have become buddies because of that. Again, because Pilate generally would look down at Herod, and Herod would hate to be under Pilate's thumb and those sorts of things. So I think that's maybe a little bit of what's going on there. So overall, in this passage, we see Jesus being interrogated by 4 groups who hold some authority. The soldiers and the temple police in those first few verses, the Sanhedrin, which are the Jewish religious authority, Pilate, who's the Roman authority, and Herod, who's kind of a hybrid somewhere in between, kind of a puppet king. They all had their views of who Jesus is, or who Jesus was. Some of it was kind of a right view, some of it was wrong, and we see that getting worked out in some of Jesus' answers. Some questions that I think it's good to consider that as we consider our application of this passage. What are the most common rejections of Jesus that we see around us today? How do people, maybe in a similar fashion to some of these different authorities, how do people reject Jesus? Are they like the guards who say, this guy's a joke, and just kind of make fun of him? Maybe that was kind of Pilate's attitude too. Hey, you're a miracle worker, you're a magic guy, I just want to kind of see you do some cool stuff and then back away from that. Are they like the Sanhedrin? Hey, we think you might be somebody important, but man, we don't want to give up control, so we're going to try to pin you with some nuance in what your title is. Do we have modern day kind of people who, like Pilate, who are just like, I just really don't want to deal with this. I'm uncomfortable with this. I want to pawn it off on somebody else, right? This guy seems a little bit crazy, and I just kind of don't want to deal with it. Is that how people are with Jesus? Do they make fun of him? Do they mock him? What are the different ways that our society is like these different leaders and authorities and how they view Jesus? A second thing to consider is that Jesus truly holds all authority, even over all of these authorities. And we might do well to answer the question, how does Jesus himself wield his own authority? How does he use all of this authority that he has? I think Jesus is meant to be an example to us, and we would do well to learn from Jesus, who is all-powerful, all authoritative in how he deals with people who are coming against him, maintaining his authority, but obviously at this point not crushing them down or killing them all. A verse we like to talk about a lot in our churches from Matthew 28 says, all authority, this is Jesus speaking, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Then he tells his disciples, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And a little bit later he says, and remember, I'm with you always to the end of the age. So I have been given all authority. You could say I'm seated at the right hand of the Father. I have all authority. I've proven it by my death and resurrection. Okay. But I'm telling you to go out in my authority and make disciples. Okay? So looking at the way Jesus handled his own authority, think about the way that he spoke here and the way that he kind of behaved in these passages. when we carry out our mission in Jesus' authority of making disciples, how does his words and his way of being here guide us in the task that he's called us to? Okay? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Jesus is demonstrating a type of authority that is all powerful, but he's choosing to reveal the truth about himself and not crush other people as he could. And I think we have an example in that. And in his authority, we go out on mission to make disciples. How can we be more like Jesus in what he demonstrates here as we go make disciples? I hope that's helpful and something to consider, and we can form some action steps out of this passage that we looked at today.